Hello, everyone. It's Cate Stillman with the Thrive with Cate podcast, and I'm here with Dr. Steffany Moonaz of Arthritis.yoga. So, welcome to the show. Do you want me to call you Dr. Steffany or Dr. Moonaz or Steffany?
Steffany is fine. Thank you.
Okay, cool. And we got in touch with from another episode I did with Anne, who does some work in your arthritis program online. And I was telling her a bit about going on my own arthritis journey and getting a diagnosis of, bone on bone, needing hip replacement. And I went on YouTube and I just was like, well, what are all the people doing who don't do surgery? And I came across Dr. David Midow, who has San Antonio Physical Therapy. Now, I started yogahealer.com in 2001. I've been doing yoga for a long time. And it was interesting to go into his thought leadership and his community, basically on like building the muscles that are underdeveloped and seeing what happens. So I've been on that journey for 6 months, and people have been asking me how that's going and am I signed up for the next surgery or am I getting benefit? And so I thought it would be great for us to get into, we have the physical therapy perspective that's already on the podcast. And I know we can't distill all of physical therapy down to one perspective. But that said, when we do have someone that has devoted their life, their career, and their research journey to a specific component, it is a body of work. And I'd like to do the same with you in terms of your side on the arthritis side. So just to give people like a brief, I know I'm talking a mile a minute and getting a lot in before I give you the mic, but just so people who don't know of you and don't know of Arthritis.yoga, Dr. Steffany Moonaz is a yoga therapist, researcher, and author. She's in SoCal in San Diego. She's research director. I find this really fascinating. You and I both have a fascination with research. So you're a research director at Southern California University of Health Sciences, and you're also a professor at Maryland University of Integrative Health. So with this whole everything you could do with your career, you go into yoga for arthritis and you're bringing evidence-informed information into your practice. So let's just get a little bit on like why of all the things that yoga can help with, of all the things as a yoga therapist and researcher, like why arthritis?
So when I was in middle school, was a dancer. I have a Master of Fine Arts in dance. I have a long storied dance background and started dancing when I was 2 years old. And in middle school, I had a day that I sort of came into the studio in a grumpy mood. And about halfway through my first dance class of the evening, I realized that I wasn't in a grumpy mood anymore. And nothing had changed about the situation that had made me grumpy. The only thing that had changed was me because I was dancing, which is one of many ways to experience a state of yoga, a state of mind-body connection. And that was when I sort of had an epiphany that was what I wanted to do with my life was, help people to understand that they are wearing the ruby slippers, that you could change the way that you feel without changing the circumstances that you think are the cause of it. And I actually had the foresight to realize I have the level of suffering that I am experiencing with whatever this middle school drama is pales in comparison to the suffering of a lot of people in the world, and they don't know that they could feel better. That was like my, 12-year-old self thinking that. Fast forward many years, and the way that I ended up working with this population in this way is incredibly serendipitous. I will not get into the whole long story of it, but I did not choose arthritis, and I did not choose yoga as the way that this would happen. It chose me, such that literally I was in a summer internship, and a gastroenterologist told me that I should write a paper about how movement helps people with rheumatoid arthritis. Knowing almost nothing about rheumatoid arthritis at that time, I did. And the many times and situations where somebody has just mentioned something to me and I did it, somebody offered something to me and I took it. The path, I sometimes say just look for the open doors, and the open doors brought me to this work, which it's only looking back at my 12-year-old epiphany that I'm able to say, oh, that's exactly what I do. Because people who are living with chronic pain conditions that have no cure are suffering. And they're so incredibly prevalent, and they could feel better. Yoga, the whole toolbox of yoga, and we can talk more about what that means, is a toolbox for experiencing that state that I experienced during that, that 12-year-old dance class.
Yeah. Yeah, and it also speaks, it seems like, to the when we, even if we look at like in the origins of yoga, of like the four aims of life, how we have this arta, or like have our stuff, have enough stuff, have a roof, have clothes, food, kama, pleasure. Like we're not meant to live in pain, right? Like we're meant to feel good. And when we do that, when we have arta and we have kama and we're doing yoga, we're doing practice, then dharma comes up and we're much able to hear this like bigger mission and like what is choosing us, and that this is the path of liberation, like this is the path of like deepest fulfillment. Dharma happens only because we have arta and kama really in right order. And for me, like the thought leadership has always been that way too, where it just comes in. It's not like I'm looking for it. It comes in, and being willing to engage and do the deep dive and listen for me, that is the yoga practice, like far beyond off the mat. Like the mat helps the kama part a lot. Like, can I feel good in my body?
Yeah, I have two thoughts about that. One is I do think that the practices help us to notice, to pay attention, so that when there is a door that opens, sometimes those open doors open quietly or subtly. You really have to be paying attention to notice them, and you have to notice them to take the opportunity. I would also say, I don't know, I sort of challenge the idea of it being linear, that you have to have all of your basic needs met in order to, but if we think about like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I don't know that it necessarily is linear. I think that actually you can find meaning and purpose without having basic needs met. I mean, if we look at some of the writing that has come from people who are in tremendous hardship, if you look at Viktor Frankl or Nelson Mandela, who don't necessarily have everything comfortable in terms of the physical reality and still are able to experience things, find things on a much subtler level. I think that it can be all of it at once.
Yeah, I agree. It's not all or none. Like there's infinite possibilities. But then there is likelihood too, right? Like where we can have these amazing 1% of 1% type human beings, and then we can have the rest of us. And it's like if we can make it through the day and get the food on the table for the kids and whatnot, then we can go more on a spiritual journey. Most ambitious women are running on 1 to 2 strengths, while 3 blind spots are holding them back. That's why fragmented success feels exhausting. In 2 minutes, the Sacred Ambition Assessment shows you your elemental signature: space, earth, fire, air, water, so you can see exactly what's powering you and what's quietly capping you. Quick clarity, no fluff. Take the Sacred Ambition Assessment. I designed it. It's really fun, and you'll get your element, you'll get your edge, and then you can schedule with me a Sacred Ambition session. See you there. Go to clubthrive.global/ambition and do your Sacred Ambition Assessment. It only takes a few minutes, and your insights can last a lifetime.
It's definitely easier to listen to the still small voice if you're not distracted by like overwhelming low back pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or hunger. Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Totally. Awesome. So let's dive in a bit around research on arthritis and just give people, I mean, obviously you've spent quite a bit of time and are an expert in this field. Like what do people need to know? And, particularly what do yoga people need to know?
By yoga people, are we talking about people who practice yoga or people who teach it, offer it, share it with others?
Yeah, I'd say both.
Or maybe both.
I'd say both,
Okay.
because I've heard a lot in communities of like why all of a sudden does this like particular group of yoga teachers need hip replacement surgery, and like what's going on with alignment techniques. And so definitely that population, as well as like what do people who are doing yoga need to know?
Yeah, I think one we're already starting to speak to, which is beyond the physical practice, that especially when we're talking about arthritis, and chronic pain conditions, people think of arthritis as being in the joint. They think, oh, well, clearly this is a musculoskeletal problem, a musculoskeletal imbalance or pathology, and therefore the solution is a musculoskeletal solution. There's a problem in the knee, we need to fix the knee. And the way that you fix the knee is by doing physical things that change the knee. And when we look at the toolbox of yoga, asana is like the obvious fit for that. Like, we're going to take asana and we're going to use them in a strategic way in order to solve this musculoskeletal imbalance, and then the knee will be healthy and the person will be well. And I think that is such a reductionist, limited way of thinking about arthritis and the experience of living with chronic pain. And I think it's also an incredibly limited way of thinking about yoga and what yoga has to offer and what yoga can do. So the first thing that I would say to both people who are living with arthritis and chronic pain and people who are delivering yoga, and if you think you are not teaching people who have arthritis and chronic pain, you're wrong.
You're wrong.
You're wrong, because people don't walk into a class with like, I have chronic pain written on their forehead. If you're teaching a class, just by nature of the statistics of the matter, there are people in that room who are experiencing some kind of a chronic pain condition. They just haven't necessarily told you. And you can't necessarily even see it in the way that they move and function, because you can be highly functional and still be experiencing chronic pain.
Yeah, I'll just vouch for that. And like denial is powerful as well. So you can also have people like me who are like crazy, super strong, very strong-willed, and just not wanting to recognize that they're in chronic pain.
Yeah, there's that too. So do not want to discount the value of asana for transformation in Anamaya Kosha. There are absolutely some amazing things that we can do with strategic use of asana in a similar way to what you heard with PT, right? The way that we would use asana strategically to help address a musculoskeletal condition would be similar to how physical therapy might go about it. And honestly, physical therapy is better trained at that particular approach. What yoga has to offer is a little bit of that. Like, yeah, sure, let's strengthen the stabilizing muscles that help to secure the joint and make up for some of the lost stability due to cartilage degeneration. Strengthen the muscles also to maintain physical function, which often gets lost for people who are in pain. So all of that, yes, let's do it. Maintain range of motion, foster balance to prevent the risk of falls so that people don't have worse pain because now they've also fallen, all of that. And the breath. Chronic pain is not in the knee. It's in the message between the knee and the brain. There's an ascending message from the knee to the brain, a descending message from the brain to the knee. Changing the knee does not necessarily change the message. The message is in the nervous system. And we have tools in the yoga toolbox that directly shift the state of the nervous system, which is where pain is. And Cate, the reason why you don't need a knee replacement yet isn't because of how much structure you have been able to support in the knee. It's not how slow the deterioration of the cartilage might be. The reason why people I can't remember, is it a knee replacement or a hip replacement we're talking about with you?
But my mom's had both, and I have in both joints. I've had, yeah.
Okay, either way, it's because of the pain that somebody gets the surgery. It's because of the reduced function that's interfering with quality of life that somebody gets the surgery. So you could build up the stability of that joint, and if somebody is still in a tremendous amount of pain that prevents them from being able to walk around the block, then they're going to need an intervention. There is actually almost no direct correlation between the amount of tissue damage in the joint and the amount of pain that someone is experiencing. And the pain is the reason for the surgery. And so if we can change pain, even if we don't change much in the structure of the joint, we're actually going to be able to delay that surgery. And for osteoarthritis, which is the reason most people are going to get a joint replacement, there is no treatment for the underlying disease. It's not like systemic inflammatory arthritis is where we're actually going to do something to change the autoimmune nature of the disease, the only treatment is symptom management. So if you can manage your symptoms in other ways, then you can delay or reduce the need for what conventional medicine has to offer in terms of how much medication, what type of medication, what type of surgical intervention, etc. It's all about feeling better, which is not just in the knee or the hip. And that gets to the other practices like mindfulness, like meditation, that change the way that we think and feel about the pain. So you could change the pain with things like relaxation practices, with things like breathing practices, but you can also change your relationship to the pain with things like meditation and mindfulness and applied philosophy. So look at the whole toolbox for the whole person, because it's the whole person that's experiencing the disease. It's not just in the hip or knee.
Yeah, I mean, this is so profound, right? And like for people who are like, huh, we can get a bit into the research. I know for me, like listening to Dr. Lorimer Mosley from Australia on tissue tolerance and pain and the chronic pain messages in the nervous system was really helpful when I was writing on Inflamed. And my friend Raphael Bender, who runs one of the largest Pilates programs in Australia, at the time I'd met him and he was just doing a ton of research and, connected me to the work of Lorimer Mosley and this whole understanding of like the pain. It's not coming from where the message is saying that it's coming from. It's like so hard to wrap our mind around, especially as Westerners. It's like, well, if that's where my attention is going, and if that's where and when I go to the doctor and they do the x-ray and they say, well, there's bone on bone contact and there's nothing we can do to regenerate the cartilage. And this is such a strong message that's coming from culture, but it's outdated. And what sucks is that the doctors are not incentivized to use the cutting edge research. And it's not even like, a lot of this research isn't like brand new either. Like this whole idea about pain and tissue tolerance. And
it's decades old.
It's decades old, but we're not getting good information from our doctors. So can we just like slow this down a little bit for people to get before we go on? Because it's so, and I know just as someone who, like my chronic joint pain came in really strong after cancer and a radical hysterectomy that changed really a lot of my physiology, like right at that area where there's increased fibrosis, and it just accelerated the scar tissue, like accelerated, plus no hormones. So anyone going into overnight menopause, like these things can compound and snowball so fast, and you're so vulnerable, and you end up at the doctor and you get outdated information. So like, let's just slow this part down and really talk about what's happening with like upregulating and downregulating messages.
Yeah.
Yoga is like, because even for me, who'd been like hardcore Yoga Sutras, Shiva Sutras, advanced yoga teacher trainings, advanced yoga therapy training for decades, still got a little in the mix with the doctor's office.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to keep this simple, because I also think like for the general yoga practitioner, yoga professional, you don't need to know how this works at a molecular level. You need to know how it works at a systems level, right? So when we're thinking the musculoskeletal system, the nervous system, when you experience acute pain, you touch a hot stove. Message goes from your hand to your spinal cord, back to your hand. The brain does not even get involved because there's no time. The brain slows things down because it's like a traffic jam up there. And you don't have time for that. You've got to get your hand off of the stove before it's like burnt all the way through. So that's acute pain. That is a completely different animal. That is on the like level of tissue. There is a relationship between the tissue and the response that is very different than what we're talking about in chronic pain. So we're going to set that aside. Now, there are all sorts of things that happen with like, you're like under a truck and you're able to lift it. Like in acute situations, there are also all kinds of like crazy magical things that happen with hormones and will and all of that. What we're talking about here is chronic pain being it's at least 3 months long. And what we understand about pain that is chronic is that the brain is heavily involved. And because the brain is involved, the activities of the brain play a role in the messaging, especially the descending pain pathways, the message from the brain to the body. So let's say I have some osteoarthritis in my knee, and my knee says to my brain, hey, something's going on here. I think maybe you want to pay attention. And that's all the knee says. The knee doesn't say exactly what it is or what to think or feel about it. It just says, pay attention to me. And the brain, which is where our self-concept is, where our history is, where our understanding of our family line and everything that's happened to us before, and all of our fears of what might happen in our future. So you said your mother had joint replacements. So, you're thinking, oh, well, this happened to my mom, and this is about the age when this happened to her, and this is going to happen to me, and I'm going to have this level of, function that my mother had, and all these people around me, and I'm getting older, and this is the stage of life when things are, all that stuff influences the message that goes from your brain to your knee that says, this is degeneration. This is the beginning of the end for your knee. I need to stop doing what I'm doing. Anytime I walk, I'm going to feel pain. I need to protect my knee. I need to stop, bad things from happening. My attachment to who I am, my fears about what might happen, right? Those are all wrapped up in this message that goes from the brain to the knee. We can change it because we, as yogis, can change our thoughts and feelings. We can change our attachments. We can change our aversions. We can change our samskaras. We can change our patterns of thinking, our projections, all of that, all of those veils of misunderstanding and misinformation that influence what we think is happening in our knee, but is actually what's happening in our brain, or maybe even really we should say mind.
Yeah. In our Ayurveda, we would say in the Manomaya Kosha. So it's like everywhere in the physiology, not just localized. Yeah. Great. That was, I think, very helpful for people to hear. It's like you are the agent of change. Like your hands are indeed on the steering wheel, and that all of the efforts that you've put forth in your practice, it's like game time.
And Cate, when your doctor says, oh, you're bone on bone and there's nothing we can do and it's time for surgery. So everybody's heard of the placebo effect, which is when you get an inert substance. I mean, what the placebo effect just demonstrates is our body's ability to change itself by suggestion, right? So we can change all of those things, like the amount of pain we're experiencing, etc. The nocebo effect is the opposite of the placebo. Instead of a positive effect to an inert substance, the nocebo effect is a negative effect. When your doctor says, oh, you're bone on bone, this is very serious, severe degeneration, there's nothing we can do for you except for surgery, that elicits a nocebo effect. You have the choice of whether you're going to internalize that, but for many people, their pain is going to be worse just from hearing that message versus a doctor who says, well, there is a lot of degeneration here, but there's also a whole lot that you can do to help you feel better and to manage this. And there's no reason for us to plan surgery until you feel like it's affecting your quality of life. That's a really different message of the same information.
Yeah. And I just come back to we're so in writing on Inflamed, one of the chapters I wrote on commune, on how humans rub off on each other, how our habits are not our own, our mindset is not our own, how much we pick up in the cultural mix and how much of this stuff dominates, right? So the doctor says one thing, then my mother piggybacks on that. And this is what happens and I love the work of Hendrickson and Erickson is we're an ultra social species. When we start to understand how much contagion is in our subtle body, is in our emotional body, is in our relational bodies, how much, the more we're tuned into subtle energy, we're often quite open. And so we're picking stuff up all the time. And for me, I had been reading the research on pain, and still it's the overpowering messages of the person in front of you, this nocebo effect, and just how real it is. So it becomes so much more important to be with people that have the habits that you want to have, that have the mindset that you want to have, just knowing that it's gonna rub off, and being in proactive clubs or groups or programs, to me, is like, it really is the answer. Whether it's my Club Thrive or your arthritis yoga, it's like, or David Midow's, his like Antonio's physical therapy stuff, that's like just all the same idea of like, be with people that are being proactive and that understand what we understand about science, both from East and West, and where it's really going. I mean, there's also, we could talk about like how much money there really is in these doctors' offices, that they need to schedule a certain number of surgeries in order to have a profitable office. And so they have their own incentives, which might not be informing us of using our minds in order to re-regulate pain, that we might avoid a surgery.
Yeah, you want to be careful who you go to for the, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I do want to add a little caveat to what we're saying, because we're talking about things like osteoarthritis, which is a degenerative arthritis for which there is no treatment to address underlying disease processes. The best first line treatment in those cases is non-pharmacological approaches. Any clinical guideline is going to say start with non-pharmacological approaches. This also applies to something like non-specific low back pain, for which there is nothing we can do for underlying disease, but there's a whole lot we can do in terms of non-pharmacological, which doesn't mean that non-pharm has to function alone. It can function in conjunction with pharmacological care and conventional care. Those are in a different universe from systemic autoimmune arthritis, where actually we do have remarkable treatment that can change underlying disease activity. And while the mind is incredibly powerful, it is very difficult to reverse the disease activity that's happening in these systemic conditions. And if they are not well managed, then there is permanent damage that can occur.
This is rheumatoid. We're talking about like
this is something like rheumatoid arthritis or
denial.
lupus or ankylosing spondylitis, right? And so I want to be cautious that we are not saying, oh, well, just have a positive mindset and you don't need conventional medicine. Actually, it's not an either or. And when we do use these strategies, then maybe you need a little less of the medication, or a little bit, a different medication, or, maybe in collaboration with your rheumatologist, you might be able to come up with a plan that is gentler on the body, because you also have this enormous toolbox of non-pharmacological approaches. And there are times that people do experience remission in those conditions. That doesn't mean that it's cured. It means that you're doing a really great job of managing it. And some people never get to a point where they're able to experience a remission. And it's really important to not play the shame and blame game with that. Some people just have very severe, intractable disease that cannot be managed without, a whole lot of conventional medicine. And is, for us to embrace that there are many ways to live with these conditions, and that what works for one person is very different from what might work for another. I think in the yoga world, sometimes there is a little shooting and finger pointing, and people who live with these conditions have heard many times, well, if you would only practice yoga, then you wouldn't have to XYZ. And I think that's a problematic road that we don't want to go down.
Yeah, amen. Amen to that. I feel like I keep having that conversation with different specialists on the show, because like in yoga, we can become overly self-reliant and really kind of block to
which is interesting, Cate. If you think about that from even like on the mat, there are lots of times when I'm working with people who are living with arthritis and chronic pain who like don't want to use a prop.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's similar. It's like, the support is there for you. It actually will allow you to experience more ease in your body, which means that you're going to actually get more benefit out of the practice because you're able to be in it with ease.
Yeah.
And you're saying, no, I like what? That's pride. That's, ego attachment. Like, right. That I'm not going to use the support that's been made available to me. Where else in our lives are we refusing the available support that is actually going to help us in our journey?
And today alone, that conversation has come up twice. One is like One was at Wellness Pro Academy. We were talking about, because we run club-based models and annual membership based on commitment to end results in Wellness Pro Academy. And it was like these people that try to go it alone. Like they're trying to do it alone. And when I look back at all my big leaps that made me successful in exactly the ways I wanted to become successful, it always never involved a closed system. It was never me on me. It was always like someone came in, I was super invested, right? I was a complete open portal to like getting exactly what I was in it with them for, and massive growth, massive leaps. And that's, I mean, everybody kind of has the same story of like, you never want to get there, go it alone.
That's right. Where we started this conversation, I was saying like doors opened, right? People handed me things. I was like, yes, let's go. Nothing that has happened in my career as a scientist, let alone my personal journey, has been, my doing via brute force.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, the other ways that when we just study, like, how does nature work? Like, whether we study an ecosystem or a microbiome as an ecosystem, like, I spend a lot of time outside, and I love plants and wild plants and ecosystems, and I just love observing. Like, even in my garden, I just put a ton of seeds in and, like, see what happens. I'm sort of on that edge of, like, where permaculture meets garden and garden meets permaculture, and I like thinned out all these weeds, and now my strawberries are like, actually, we kind of liked having the extra shade, And it's like we don't often in this Western culture, especially I'd say like Americans have a certain level of disadvantage in our our sort of like manifest destiny and our rugged individualism, which is baked into our culture, where we're like, I got to do it alone. The Euros, I found, they're like almost excessively social, where they don't realize where they need to make a go at something to like pull the community ahead and take that risk. Americans are better at the risk, but my goodness, there's a level where rugged individualism just leaves you isolated and lonely and needing a hip replacement surgery and a cane instead of using your yoga props. Now, back to what are let's go right into the yoga teachers right now. Like, what are some of the alignment things you've seen that actually are like worsening their joint inflammation or creating problems or not downstream?
So I think what you're talking about, this like brute force issue, that's actually what I think yoga teachers themselves in their own brain, you say yoga teachers are needing joint replacements, etc. It's like going too hard, too fast, too frequent in the physical practice. So, there's this great, I don't know who to attribute it to, but I heard someone say that you let go of the asana one by one, and the last one you let go of is corpse pose. Like that's it. That's all you're left with at the end is corpse pose.
I have never heard that. I just want to pause and like really help people take that in, that I've been doing a lot of death work in the community in Club Thrive as like a primal habit of like, how do we have agency in the dying process? And this ability to be conscious and let go, right? This like, what does this mean? And the stat around at 52 is when the most diagnoses of osteoarthritis like come in, right? Where there's this like things happen in the middle of life. A lot of autoimmune conditions are diagnosed around 50. A lot of like, I have Lynch syndrome, like a lot of the cancer stats for certain genetic tendencies, like they ripen around this midlife. And it seems to me like there's a big like before 50, after 50, midlife, like what is the crossroads, like what is the crisis? And in Ayurvedic medicine, which is my background, there's this understanding that the chief cause of disease is just not living what you know. Like you already have N=1, like a really good data set by 50 to know like how to get yourself in trouble and how to get yourself out of trouble. And when you don't live that, it's not knowing, it's not cognitive, it's when you don't act it out that the real trouble begins.
Yeah, so when I was writing my dissertation research was on the effects of yoga for people living with arthritis in the Johns Hopkins Arthritis Center. It's a lot of typing, and I developed a ganglion cyst in my wrist, and I was like 23 or something very young. But it became difficult, uncomfortable, painful for me to do anything weight bearing on that wrist. Now, doing something that was weight bearing on that wrist was not actually going to cause any long-term damage. It was like pressure because there's a cyst in there that made it very uncomfortable. And for a long time, I still did it because I knew that I wasn't technically hurting myself, like crow pose and, all of that stuff where not only am I weight bearing on my wrists, but I'm weight bearing entirely on my wrists and entirely on like a completely like end of range loading. And there was a certain point where I thought, why? What do I get out of crow pose that makes me feel like I want to do that, even though it's causing me a lot of discomfort? And it doesn't only bother my wrist when I'm in it, it bothers my wrist after I'm out of it. And I'm still doing it because I'm 23 and I think I should be able to do crow pose or locust, like how long I sat lotus rather how long I sat in lotus pose, like full lotus, right? Like feet on thighs, how many years I sat in that pose because I could. And to be able to say, and I'm perimenopausal now, I'm in this stage of life where I'm like, I am woman, hear me roar, like I don't need to do that. I am willing to let go. Like if we're talking about asana that we let go of, I am willing to never do crow pose again. Not that I can't, but that I choose not to because it doesn't serve me.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of yoga teachers go wrong, is insisting on doing things because they think, oh, I'm a yoga teacher, and so I should be able to do 20 chaturangas in a class. You don't have to. You can teach a beautiful class. And honestly, you can see your students better when you're not in chaturanga. But also, what message are you sending to your students?
Yeah.
Are you giving them permission, not even just permission, but are you making it comfortable for them to decide what feels good for them in that moment? What is the right decision for them in that moment, body, mind, and spirit? So I think, speaking to the teachers, look at your own practice. What is serving you? How is it serving you? It doesn't mean don't do the hard stuff. It means choose the hard stuff for the right reasons, and also create a class environment where your students are making right decisions out of mindful reflection and an understanding of their own body, not because they feel like they should, or they're getting like a dopamine hit from being the winner chicken dinner because they were able to do this like advanced
competitive
pose.
Yoga.
Yeah. It's
Totally.
up to us to create a culture in our classes that is yogic.
Yeah, and it really, to me, speaks to the yoga gives us neuroplasticity. I think that's what you were talking about in the beginning with like we can change the experience that we're having. We can change the thinking pattern, the feeling pattern. We can change the parts of our brain that are active. We can change our state experiences. There's like so much dynamicism that yoga, truly, that the eightfold yoga path gives us access into. And as we tap into that, then identity evolution naturally happens without as much resistance, right? And so when we resist that, and it's like for me, the identity evolution as like a very active, athletic, very good athlete. She's one of the boys, like whole identity. And like middle age, it's like, oh wait, like who am I now? What does this look like now? And one of the things that David helped me a lot with in terms of this identity evolution on like the ego level is he talked a lot about like when you have a flare up, like you better use support for walking and just get the aggravation like out of the system. And so being in the Teton Mountains, like I actually had hiking poles. So I was like, all right, I'm taking these in the house. And my family had a lot of resistance to like, what the fuck, And I'm like, yep, I'm following this path. So then I was with my dad, who's 87, and we're walking and he's trying to like, I don't know, fake it till you make it or something. I'm like, dude, you need some poles to be upright. Like, let me lend you my poles. And his resistance is like, I'm not the kind of person who...
Right.
is so in his way. And hearing David talk about this stuff, I'm like, oh, right, then you just like trip and fall because he doesn't have that much ankle flexibility right now. And that's one of the things I notice when my joints flare up. I'm like, oh, I lose stability in that whole side, like all the way through. So how do I support myself? How do I open up to like, this is now like not going to numb out, not going to like go to like more food, more drinking, more whatever to like avoid the experience. Instead, how can I, and I love this because in yoga we do this all the time, like how can I support this reality, right? Like it's what props do, is they like support a form if we can't hold that form where we're at right now.
Yeah, it also, on just a very basic biomechanical level, it allows you to sustain a healthier alignment, which is going to serve you in terms of postural habits, gait habits, and we could think of those as samskaras, right? Like grooves that we get ourselves into. And this is one of the reasons why it's problematic for people to wait too long for a joint replacement, is because some people are experiencing incredible imbalance, and they're doing using all kinds of compensatory strategies in order to be able to function amidst incredible pain, weakness, imbalance. And then after the surgery, it's actually very difficult to find your way back to the balance, the strength, the stability that had deteriorated all of that time. So whatever you can do to sustain that while you're working to manage it non-pharmacologically, use the poles, use the props.
Use it all.
Yeah, exactly. For your father, better for him to walk upright
Yeah.
with poles and all of the benefits of upright walking, core engagement, and even lower likelihood of falling, of course. But then he's going to be able to stand up tall when he's not walking better because he was able to practice that with the use of a prop.
Yeah, it's so big. And there's so many ways that we do this. There's so many ways that we want to be who we were instead of allowing what is now and what is the support. Okay, so let's actually get into, so I just want to kind of back up and say, like, big picture, we've talked about yoga in terms of the actual postures and asana and like the blood flow, the alignment in the joints and all the mechanical. That is a part of how yoga works for arthritis. And then this even bigger part is the message that's going between the brain and the joint that is talking, as my mother would say, is talking, is, in my experience, is like screaming for attention. Right. And that part is actually even bigger. And so this part of the whole body, and when we first come to yoga, often we're introduced to our breath, and the breath is this unifying factor between the mind and the body. So these breath practices, even the simplest pranayama, Ujjayi, like a slower, deeper Darth Vader style breath in and a longer breath out, starts this unifying experience. And that creates a state change of consciousness where now, instead of our awareness just being sucked into the pain cave in an isolated part of the physiology, we're now in a breath pulsating, bigger experience of our physiology. And in this, we're rewiring this pain tolerance or this tissue tolerance. And this is one of the best strategies that we have. And in this, we start to notice our mind, because we're able to use our breath, focus our mind on our breath. And then we're able to actually change what we're thinking, because we're not just focusing on the part. Now we're focusing on the whole. And that these are like these are the big guns am I catching it? The big guns from yoga with arthritis.
Yeah. So when we put yoga head to head with strengthening exercises, so you could see how strengthening exercises would be of benefit for managing osteoarthritis pain. When we put yoga head to head with strengthening exercises, in the short term, they appear to be similar. So they are similar for reductions in pain, for improvements in physical function. Yoga does a lot better for improving mood, which you would expect. This is important because when you're in pain, your mood suffers as well. And so we don't want to only affect the pain and function. We also want you to feel better. So yoga does have an edge in helping you to feel better. But where it really outperforms is in the long term. When we follow people over time, we give them either strengthening exercises or a yoga practice, and we follow them over a longer period of time, and then yoga outperforms strengthening on all counts. Better at pain management, better at improving function, better at, of course, sustaining those mood changes. So what's the difference? Well, one of the differences, the really easy one is, well, people like yoga more, and so they do it. So if you give people a tool and they don't use it, it's not going to help, right? People are more likely to keep practicing yoga versus if you give them strengthening exercises, the likelihood, how many people are consistently doing their PT homework? There are some, but right. But
yeah,
right. We would say
exception to the
adherence is
rule.
better long term with yoga because it feels good in a different kind of way. But besides that, you have a few things happening. So one is the pranayama, right? And so that can be in a variety of ways. So you could do integration of breath with movement, which does tend to slow and regulate the breath, deepen the breath. You can do a dedicated pranayama practice, and especially things like ujjayi or 3-part breath, where it allows for a deepening of the breath, especially that extended exhale, because every time we exhale, our heart rate goes down. So we're coming out of stress response into relaxation response. And so pain reactivity goes down. Mindfulness, so you can be mindful in the movement, right? Paying attention fully to the practice that you're in. You can also do a mindfulness meditation where you're sitting and tending to the breath or tending to the sounds in the room, whatever that is. That changes brain structure and function, and especially those areas of the brain that are associated with our thoughts and feelings about pain, how we think and feel about pain. We can look at functional MRI and see that brain structure and function is changing. Gray matter grows in those areas of regulation. So that's not happening in strengthening exercises to the same degree because it's not as intentional. Right? We do rewire the brain somewhat with strengthening exercises, but we're not necessarily lighting up those specific areas about thoughts and feelings in the same kind of way. And then you have what you were talking about, the Sangha, the benefit of the Sangha. Now, we can't parse these apart super well. We can't say how much of the change is because of the sense of community, the sense of connection, how much of the change is because we have changed nervous system function, but we can say all of those things are happening in a yoga practice, different from what you get by strengthening the stabilizing muscles that surround the joint. So it's not either or, it's yes and. Do that, do the physical stuff, and don't leave out, use the breath, integrate the breath, make it a mindfulness practice. I've talked about the yogification of physical therapy. Take your PT exercises. They are experts at being able to design a physical practice that is going to change the structure of your joint. Take that and integrate your breath and make it a mindfulness practice. Don't distract yourself by like watching, a show on Netflix while you're doing PT. Make it a yoga practice, and then you get all of these other benefits that make it more sustainable and stronger of an effect than you're going to get from just strengthening alone.
Yes, amen, sister. I do. So I do a lot of sports, right? So for me, like biking, psychotherapy, we call it, right? And what I notice is I can tell if my knee starts talking, it means I'm out. It means my mind is out of the experience that I'm having. And if I can bring my mind in, what I do is one of the first things I notice is that I'm using my biomechanics incorrectly, right? So that I'm clearly more in the front body, which is my pattern. I'm less in the back body. I'm less in my butt, which means I'm breathing higher in my body, and I've got to use my abdominis transversus and draw in, get my femur bones back and apart and breathe from there, which I cannot do and think about something else at the same time this point. So we can do this and as yogis, if I hadn't had, and this is where I'm like, we have such an unfair advantage, it's amazing, right? Because we've had all of this training with our breath and our mind and our physiology. And so because of that, we can use it. So we can use that in all, so then I'm doing it with my canes and my walking sticks, right? It's all the time we have this opportunity to get into the neuroplasticity. And that's exactly what I'm hearing in what you're saying is we can do that in our PT, we can do this. And then, but it doesn't go the other way is what we're also hearing you're saying. If we're just going to the physical therapist or just watching like the physical therapist on YouTube, which was my way. It's like we can get the like, okay, I need to build certain muscles and I need to do this mechanically. But because they don't have a mind, breath, body, or musculature understanding or like just baseline assumptions, it's not going to get us to the same place.
Yeah, I would say actually that's changing. And there are lots of physical therapists now who do have that orientation, and even who are also yoga teachers or even yoga therapists, and who are incorporating breath and mindfulness into their work. And this is happening in PT and in OT and in recreational therapy. So yoga is becoming more of an interdisciplinary of the way that other approaches get delivered. But yeah, strictly speaking, strengthening exercises alone are not going to get you there. There are benefits. There are.
No joke. My butt is amazing now. And I had like a completely atrophied like left butt. Like I couldn't find it.
Yeah, and also not just musculoskeletal benefits. There are also mood benefits to exercise, right? We know that when we exercise, we feel better. So there is definitely crossover from a strictly physical practice to the other koshas, but it's not a direct line in, right? In yoga, we have practices that go right there. And so it's not the indirect effect that you can get from physical activity alone.
Yeah. Yay. And I just want to go back into like some of the research on that Kula Sangha comment as well, because like on my Club Thrive call this morning, we just did this whole Primal Habits challenge and people are doing 72-hour water fast or 5-day fast mimicking diet, which is a normal thing in our community. And what we notice is this: when newcomers come in and experiment, right? Like they will experience something that's so different than trying to do it on their own. And it's so hard to get the double-blind research when there's so many freaking factors. There's like too many factors to control for. Do you want to speak a little bit to this, where are some of these, like yoga never happened out of Sangha. It never happened out of Kula or community, right? There's a way that we're an ultra social species and we're motivated. We motivate each other with the things that are hardest to do, whether that's like create a pranayama practice or meditation practice, or to do a 72-hour water fast regularly. You know, these things that are hard to do that lead to the long-term outcomes we want, that are hardest to do in the short term, we know are easiest to do together. And yet so much of the Western medical industry is focused on this one-on-one, like you are so special, you have such a special disease, I can only treat you one-on-one, when what you have to do is all these adversity habits to actually feel connected and better and motivated and inspired and do the things that are really, really hard to do one-on-one with your primary healthcare provider.
I have so much to say. I'm going to try to keep track of the series of thoughts that I had while you were saying that. Okay, so one thing I want to bring up is there is some really cool research on churchgoers. It doesn't have to be church, but people who attend religious services regularly. So this could be synagogue, mosque. The way that it's conceptualized in the research is at least once a week, right? So you could say that's somebody who regularly spends time in a meaningful community, right? An intentional community. People who do that live longer. And there are a whole bunch of reasons. So, I mean, let's set aside the possibility that, like, if you go to regular services, you're going to be rewarded by God and therefore you're going to live longer. Let's just set that possibility aside. There are a whole bunch of ways that this can work, because when people are in community, a whole bunch of things happen. So we do have those direct physiological benefits of feeling a part of something, feeling supported. You walk into a place where everybody knows your name and they care how your kids are doing, and all of a sudden there's a physiological response to that, right? There's like, especially as we get older and people live more in isolation, single, widow, widower, etc., just the handshakes in that weekly community make a difference. But also there is tangible support. So somebody has trouble with their car and it gets mentioned in the community and somebody is volunteering to help, or somebody is like, lost a job and needs a little help with food for their family, and that kind of tangible support is available. They also tend to be pro-health communities. So people tend to be making healthier choices, like not drinking a lot of alcohol and, maybe eating healthier foods, etc. And so the sorts of norms that happen in those communities can be pro health, pro longevity kinds of norms. So we are moving away from religiosity as a society. More and more people, especially in the West, are considering themselves unaffiliated. There are lots of ways to experience intentional community that provides that kind of support, and the tangible support, the social support, the encouragement, even the accountability of you are on a step challenge and there are other people who know that you're on a step challenge. That makes a difference. We did a study in a federally qualified health center in the Bronx, actually 3 different centers. And the way that the study was designed, yoga therapy can be delivered in small groups. It can also be delivered one-on-one. And actually the school of yoga that I come from pushed really hard for the group model to be a part of the IYT standards because of the incredible benefits of community. When we designed the study, we designed it for people to be in dyads, to receive care from a yoga therapist in pairs, and those pairs were random. So this is different from I'm going to come to yoga therapy with my mom or with my caregiver, or right. This is like some total stranger that you've never met before who also has some kind of chronic pain condition, but like you're 25 and they're 85 and you've got like, fibromyalgia and they have non-specific low back pain, like totally different journeys, right? You speak different languages, you like come from different cultural backgrounds, especially in the Bronx. There's so much diversity in that regard. What we saw in terms of how these pairs lifted each other up, especially because they started the yoga at different times. So the one that knew a little bit more about the practices would be teaching, modeling, encouraging the other one. The older one would be mentoring the younger one. Like the dynamics that happen even in just these pairs. We wrote a whole paper on just the dynamic between these pairs. So much would be lost if we decided, oh, actually, we can better individualize your care if we just see you one-on-one, right? So that showing up, which is harder and harder these days as our lives are so like busy and full, and we've gotten so used to doing things remotely. How many people sign up for something and they just say, oh, I'll watch the recording instead of showing up in real time with the rest of the community. There is absolute benefit to that. And we actually do have the research to support it. When we design yoga studies, there's sort of a continuum in research. I was talking about reductionism. You can reduce it down to its pieces and parts and say, what is the value of this specific thing in isolation? And that's one type of research. And I would say it has value because it helps us to understand the effects of individual components so that we can use them strategically. And then there's the research that we think of as being more holistic, whole person, pragmatic, where we say, actually, we don't care what the specific contribution of all of these individual things is. We want to know what is the effect of the whole package. And so what happens when we deliver this whole practice, and maybe there's a synergy where the whole is greater than the parts, and we want to understand both. The reductionist research has given us incredible nuggets, like when you spend more time exhaling, your heart rate goes down. We want to know things like that. We know that if you stand in tree pose for 2 minutes a day, you're less likely to fall. That's really valuable information. And we also need to understand what is the effect of a comprehensive whole person practice, which includes the community where it happens.
Yeah. Amen. Amen to that. And where I've landed after 25 years at it, with communities and growing communities and seeing like where do we get the biggest bang for our buck, like where do we get the most transformation for our time and energy and money investment, is it goes hybrid. So it's like Yes, it's synchronistic and asynchronistic. Yes, it's online and it's in person. It's hybrid. And the more we get this, like I just had a 3-day members event at my home in Alta, Wyoming, and everyone who came, it's called Breakthrough 72. Everyone who comes has a huge breakthrough. And then they actually fuel the entire community, right? And then other members will be able to come to the next event who couldn't make this one. And what we find is that it's the stabilization of the breakthrough requires the community and the ongoing relationship to be in a committed container. And if we don't have that, then it's just a peak experience that we have together. Like a lot of people have this at yoga class where you have this peak experience and then there's not the structure is such that there's nothing to stabilize it. It's just drop in. There's no real investment commitment to people don't know each other's biggest long-term goals and their current critical issues and their current critical strategies. But if we have communities that do that intentionally, like, wow, humans are incredible. Collaborative intelligence is unbelievable. Like the contagion effect is real. And we can leverage all that to experience things that we otherwise cannot experience in this lifetime. Yeah. Cool. Dr. Steffany Moonaz, it has just been such a pleasure to tap into your wisdom and give people, I think, a much more comprehensive understanding of yoga and arthritis. You have a ton of resources on arthritis.yoga. People can find out more about you and your community and your offerings there. Anything you want to add in closing or anything you want to come back and talk with us about at another date?
In closing, I will say there is a tremendous amount of pain in the world, not just in people's joints. Collectively, we are going through some stuff as a human species. And the more we can get regulated, get right ourselves, the more we can show up in the world as a support for others. You can't do that, to your point about making sure that you've got your basic needs met. There are lots of people who don't have their basic needs met. And so if we can do our own practices and stay well and whole, we can better show up where we can be of greatest service.
I'll stay to all of that. Yeah. And thank you for your dedication in your work and your research and putting yourself out there. A lot of people in the yoga world are like, I wish I could put myself out there. It's really great when someone just owns it and creates a whole universe, little cubby of a universe on the internet where they can be found. And it's a lot. I know it's a lot. I can see your life's work and appreciate what you've put in. So thank you for that.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much for having me.